phrasing that as focusing on the 20%, even if some of those 20% items aren't what you'd like to be doing throughout the day, is going to maximize the impact you're able to have on your business. Explore the transformative power of the Pareto Principle in entrepreneurship, as this episode dives into how focusing on key elements can dramatically optimize business success. Please subscribe to our podcast to stay updated, and for more information, visit our website at profspirit.com. Also, if you know someone who might enjoy our content, please share our podcast with them to help us grow.
The Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast is your ultimate launchpad for igniting ideas and skyrocketing your entrepreneurial dreams. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing brilliantly as always, Professor Palin. What about you?
Staying busy, as always.
Love to hear that.
And it's good busy, too. There's bad busy and there's good busy.
Right. Good busy when you feel like you're making forward momentum on things.
Absolutely. Well, Ryan, today I want to talk about a concept that I believe not many people are familiar with it or have ever heard about it, but it can be very important in your decision-making with your business, and that's called the Pareto Principle, also referred to as the 80-20 rule. There was an Italian economist in the 19th century in Italy. His name was Vilfredo Pareto. And he noticed that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the population. And he thought that causal relationship was interesting. He looked at applying it to other venues and other areas besides just who owned the land. That's morphed into, in business, for example, 20% of your customers generate 80% of your profits. 20% of your sales force generate 80% of your sales. You can then also tie it into productivity. 20% of your activities generate 80% of your results. In software, which you do a lot of work with, 20% of the code can cause 80% of the bugs. And you can just keep going on and on.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Through my experience, a lot of those items have been true. You can prove that the 80-20 rule is really effective.
It's not an absolute 20. It's a general rule of thumb. But what you want to look at is the implications of that. For example, revenue implications. If you know 80% of your profits are generated by 20% of your customers, you really want to focus on those 20% of your customers to make sure they're getting serviced. Are there any issues with those customers? That's your focal point. Now, that doesn't mean you ignore the other 80%, but your first step is to make sure those 20% are satisfied because you get 80% of your profit from that. And then you can go to the 80% of the customers that generate 20% of your profit.
That's exactly right. It's more of a tool for where you're going to focus, where your attention is needed, because ultimately, if you're going down this journey of entrepreneurship, you'll realize that your time is one of the biggest limiting factors you have.
Way back in the dark ages, I purchased an office supply store, and I knew nothing about office supplies. One of the first things I did was look at the 80-20 rule. I wanted to know what 20% of the products that were offered were generating 80% of the sales. And then when I went in to negotiate with the salespeople, I made sure I negotiated hard on those 20% because that would have a bigger impact on my bottom line.
That's smart. And I'm sure it was effective for you.
Well, very much so. The 3M Post-it notes would be an example of one that's in the 20%. I went very hard on the negotiations to get the best possible price. If I had some other form of product that I might sell minimal, I really wasn't worried about negotiating that. I'd be buying one case a year. It didn't matter.
I'm sure your goal at the end of it was to negotiate all pricing, but you were able to start with those 20% heaviest hitters.
Especially not knowing the industry, that's the first thing I did is said, what are the 20%? If you're running a production facility, you want to identify what 20% of your efforts are leading to 80% of the results. So if there's inefficiencies, you want to go in and correct that 20% that's generating 80% of the results, and you can quickly improve efficiencies as opposed to just looking at everything at 100% and everything is equal.
We can all get caught in that, or I tend to not get caught in the big picture. There are just some items I like doing more than others. So I'll spend my time on those items and I'll push off the ones that I don't want to deal with. Rephrasing that as focusing on the 20%, even if some of those 20% items aren't what you'd like to be doing throughout the day, is going to maximize the impact you're able to have on your business.
You can put in the same amount of effort and time, but by focusing on the 20%, you get greater results with the same amount of effort and time.
Exactly.
That almost makes sense, doesn't it?
Almost makes sense.
To do that, you want to look at things along the line of you have to do data analysis, employee feedback, customer feedback. You can do time tracking. You want to continuously experiment. This is not just a stagnant exercise.
That's more of the difficulty through this. If you were just told, here are the 20% things that you should work on, this would be a no-brainer. Everybody listening could easily follow this as a doctrine of how to improve their business. The difficulty lies in how do you figure out what that 20% is and what the 80% is? Where is that line drawn in the sand?
To simplify it, I break it up into 3 different areas. One is I look at time allocation. A second is I look at investment allocation, and that includes products and purchases. And then the third is manpower allocation.
So time allocation would be where most time from the business is spent from a company-wide perspective.
Yes, definitely from company-wide and sometimes even personal.
Monetary allocation, I think, is fairly straightforward. Where are you spending the most money?
Exactly.
And what was the third one?
Manpower allocation. What's my personnel doing? So, for example, 20% of my sales force generates 80% of the sales. Well, I want to make sure I'm focusing on those 20% of the salespeople, make sure they have all the resources they need, what issues they're facing, and address those because they're the biggest generators. And again, I'm not ignoring the other 80%. I'm just focusing up front on the biggest producers.
And that can go into a retention strategy. How do you make sure that those people are happy and they're not going to leave?
Especially with the sales force, they're very often monetarily driven. And if you can improve the amount of money they're making, that has all types of wide-ranging benefits.
And losing one of those 20% people, it's not like the magic rule, just the universe makes it happen. If you lose one of them, the next person you hire is going to magically be in that 20%. Unfortunately, there will be a whole weeding out process to get somebody back to fulfill that role.
We know that it's not as easy as just magically replacing everyone's equal. Some people have greater abilities in some areas than others. That's just a fact.
It is a fact. Hiring and firing is really important to realize where they sit in that 80-20 role.
Now, this is not just for startups either or entrepreneurial ventures. Major companies like Toyota uses the 80-20 rule in their manufacturing and supply chain process.
Oh, is that right?
Walmart does it with their inventory management. It can have some major impacts for all types of businesses and organizations.
Especially when you're in the solo entrepreneur realm. A certain number of hours a day is all you have. You haven't gotten to the point where you can duplicate your time through coworkers or employees. So making sure that you're maximizing those hours is really, really vital.
We all have the same amount of time, but if you can take 1 hour and get greater results with that 1 hour, you're definitely ahead of the game.
Without a doubt.
Now, if you don't apply this, you're missing out on opportunities, very often high potential opportunities. You're misallocating your resources, costing you lost profits. The competition will be gaining and taking steps ahead of you, so you can be falling behind. Burnout and morale, which you mentioned with the salespeople, there's all types of issues that you can face when you're not applying the 80-20 rule.
Is the scary side of not staying competitive. I often find myself thinking about this. If I really need to motivate myself, I'll often go back to, for every hour I'm not doing something my competitor is, or the guy that I want to beat, or the guy that I want to imitate his business model or her business model. It's a motivating factor, but can be discouraging sometimes.
Definitely. You don't want to lose because you're outworked.
That's exactly right.
Ryan, can you believe it? The Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast is now listened to in 100 countries.
That's incredible. A huge shout out to our listeners worldwide. You guys are amazing.
To celebrate this milestone, we're offering an exclusive 50% off the Janus Entrepreneurial Assessment, but only for a limited time.
That's right. If you've ever wanted to gain deep insights into your entrepreneurial tendencies, now's the perfect chance to do it at half the price.
The Janus Entrepreneurial Assessment is a pioneering tool that delves into 7 essential dimensions of entrepreneurial tendencies.
Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur or looking to amplify your value in any other environment, this assessment will provide you with invaluable insights.
Don't wait. Visit profspirit.com today to claim your 50% discount and unlock your entrepreneurial potential today.
Use promotion code JEA100 to secure this temporary discount. And of course, keep listening, keep innovating, and let's keep growing this entrepreneurial movement together.
Now, being the analytical geek that I am, I use a process for implementing the 80-20 rule. Would you like to hear what the process is?
And let's hear it.
First, I collect data because you won't know what 20%, 80% is generated unless you collect the data. And then I identify what key metrics are. You love the metrics. What are the key success factors associated with the metrics? Then I'll actually perform a Pareto analysis. I'll crunch the numbers to determine what the 80-20 is. The fourth step, I visualize the data. I put it in a chart to make it easier for my simple mind to understand. Then comes the application. The fifth step is I focus on my efforts. As I'm moving forward, I optimize and innovate. From there, I just monitor and adjust regularly. And also within that, in that whole process, I'm educating my team on the process, so they're doing the same thing.
So how often are you running one of these analyses?
I probably would do it once a quarter, maybe once every 6 months.
Does it take you very long once you understand what you're doing?
Yeah, first time takes a while. Second time is much easier, like with anything else. Third time becomes a charm. I can do one of these in a couple of hours.
So there's light at the end of the tunnel if someone's looking to do this for the first time.
If you procrastinate and put it off, it gets harder because if you wait 2 years to do it, then you're almost starting over again.
Right. Probably the early data is pretty useless by that point.
Exactly. Well, that's my shot at the Pareto Principle and the 80-20 rule. Do you have any final thoughts on it?
Whether you're going to actually take the time to figure out what exactly the 20% is, or whether this is a thought experiment, it's still something fantastic to keep in mind. There are always areas that can use more attention to go farther. Learning where those areas are can optimize your life, whether it's your business or whether it's your personal life.
I would encourage all of our listeners that are driving a venture to implement this because really your expenditure on this is time, and it's not a tremendous amount of time. And the payoff is very large. Small amount of time invested, minimal dollars, if any, great payback. There's no reason not to do it.
Love that. A win-win, it sounds like.
Definitely. To conclude, we want to ask our listeners to please follow us, follow our podcast by subscribing. And also, if you would like further information, please visit our website at profspirit.com.
Absolutely. Send us to a friend as well. If you know someone that might be interested in this, that's what really helps us grow.
Well, let's get entrepreneurial.
Let's get entrepreneurial.
We extend our gratitude for your presence and attention. Check out profspirit.com to discover resources and courses designed specifically for innovators like you. Stay on the cutting edge by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and other platforms as it is released. Until then, keep the entrepreneurial flame burning.